There once was a man, so jealous, so angry, so full of evil, that he thought of nothing else. His name, Jaidas. He was the second-born son to the king and queen of Judah, a beautiful land covered with rich forests, meadows of flowers, and a sparkling waterfall. All of this beauty went unappreciated by Jaidas. He longed for power with the entirety of his black heart. To say Jaidas was the jealous type is a grave understatement. He resented being the younger sibling. He felt he was born to rule. He inexplicably hated his older brother for being firstborn, for being king. His hatred had grown from a childhood rivalry to an all-consuming ocean of hatred, which grew more powerful with each passing year. Jaidas hated how age mattered. He felt he could run the kingdom so much better than his brother. He was everything better than his older brother. Smarter, stronger, more cunning, and on and on. His bold conceit led to resentment. This resentment led to a bitter volcano of jealousy. Before too long, Jaidas despised his brother and family. He began to plot ways to take over the kingdom. There was some hope for Jaidas. The king and queen had never produced a male heir, so as long as their daughter, Ivy, was unwed, the crown would pass on to Jaidas upon the death of the king. Jaidas knew he was the only one who hoped for this result. He knew that even the townspeople, with their limited exposure to him, feared him. With one glance, the waves of evil rolling off of him were revealed. Naturally, they feared to be within range of his evil ocean spray. He saw how they cringed whenever he approached. The townspeople could see how Jaidas was controlling, aggressive, and inconsiderate of others. They saw how filled he was with evil. It seeped out his fingertips, his feet. It leaked out his mouth, eyes, and ears. Drip by horrid drip it pulled around him wherever he went, challenging every happiness. A dictator at heart, it was Jaidas's way or no way at all. Everyone feared the lengths Jaidas would go to in order to rule the kingdom. Their fears were not unwarranted. Jaidas had been thinking long and hard on how to become king. The sooner he could rule the land, the better. Jaidas did not take well to not being in control. He faced two obstacles. The first, his brother. The second, his niece, both of whom were alive and well. Even if Ivy were single upon her father's death, if she married later on, then Jaidas would be stripped of the crown as it is rightfully hers. Jaidas sat brooding over this in his room one day. As he sat, he stared out the window at his attractive niece, pondering his options. As he thought, something occurred to him. An abrupt death of the king would be cause for alarm. But a slower death, now that may just work. And as for Ivy, if she cannot marry another, why not marry me? With these revelations, he became excited. His passion for power was stoked and heated. His blood coursed, fighting against their vessels, pulsing with a hunger through his veins. Maybe there was a way to get what he strived for after all. Jaidas wasted no time in implementing his plan. That day he began attempting to manipulate his niece. Though in his disdain for her he had rarely spoken to Ivy in the past, he took up instigating deliciously destructive conversations with her. He reminded her how isolated their kingdom was. He would add in comments like, "Princess, do you realize it has been over 300 years since a prince last traveled through these parts?" Jaidas would then continue in his speech, reminding her that if she really wanted to get married and become queen as she claimed, then she could only marry a man of noble blood. For this she had one option. He knew it, she knew it, the entire kingdom knew it. Her only option was her uncle. He made moves to get closer to the princess. He tried to hide his malicious intentions, but to no avail. Everyone in the castle could tell he had a cruel objective in mind. It was not difficult to pick up on the bitter edge of the words he spoke. Jaidas could not hide his other thoughts from her. He would lightly brush the back of his hand along her arm when she was close enough to touch. He often looked at her like a starved man eyeing the fatted calf to take for his meal. His niece was quite the object to behold. He yearned to dominate her will with his strong hands. Overcome by his longings for power and for her, he decided it was time to set phase 2 of his plan in motion. Jaidas stood from his place at the long mahogany table. Having finished his dinner, he left his plate for someone else to clean up, glad he had made it through another meal without the presence of his annoyingly gentle brother. He fingered the vial in his pocket, making sure it was there as it should be. One of the cooks walked into the dining hall just then, placing the king's, queen's, and Ivy's food on the table. Once the cook had left the room again, Jardas casually strolled by the king's plate. Having opened the small vial in his pocket, he quickly poured its contents into the king's full glass. If he wasn't going to die on his own before his daughter married, then Jardas would just have to help him. The king's illness came on slowly at first, and then took a rough turn for the worse as he was continuously poisoned. Jardas watched with a sick pleasure as his brother grew weaker every day. His fantasy grew clearer as he saw on his niece's face the anguish she was in. It was evident she was being torn apart, worry for her father on one half and a disgust muddled with fear of her uncle on the other. As Jardas was walking down the corridor past the sick room where his brother lay wasting away, he heard his niece speaking. Ivy said to her father, "Daddy, I don't know what to do. You go weaker by the day and I worry for you. I'm concerned for the whole kingdom. What will we do when you have left us? The mere thought of marrying my uncle, whom evil has saturated so fully, is appalling. I fear the outcome of such a union." With that, Jardas heard her begin to cry, losing strength, just like her father, as her hopes faded. The king was unable to respond, lacking the strength to speak. Jardas departed from the presence of her voice. In his cold selfishness, he underestimated the strength of her will to resist him. In his lackluster life, devoid of love, he could not fathom her determination for righteousness. He may appall his niece, but she was quickly running out of options. She would come to him yet, will broken, ready to surrender to his might. He salivated at the thought of his desires coming to fruition. At this, the father cleared his throat, fearing the inappropriateness that may fall on his children's ears. The traveler acknowledged his reaction, pausing ever so slightly before continuing on with his story.